everyone, welcome back to An Artist's Life, and I'm Sidra Kaluska. Today I'm going to work on putting in my tomato plants and see how that goes. Our weather has been rather different this season. It's kind of echoing last year. Typically, I plant my tomatoes the first weekend in May, but we've had these weird warm spells in April where it hit 80 degrees, and then in May, we've had late frosts. So last night it was even down in the low 30s. And since it was so cold, we have frost warnings, and I didn't want to risk losing my tomatoes because I was so eager to get them in the ground. So I've had them in their containers much longer than I normally do, but luckily I changed how I was starting them this year. Typically I would start them in small cups, transplant them into larger cups that were maybe about like that big by say that tall. So maybe about 3 by 3 inches roughly, so not really big, but usually big enough for me to get them in the ground. This year I started my tomatoes much earlier than I normally do. I frequently have in the past started them about mid-March. This year I started them in late February. I just wanted to make sure that my tomato plants were really nice and far along by the time I got them in the ground, but I wanted to ensure that they had enough leg room that they wouldn't get very unhappy before that time came. So, these are my tomatoes. They seem to be pretty happy with the setup that I have. So, what I have going on, we have some birds trying to photobomb us. Okay, so what I have here, I like recycling when I can recycle, and well, I'm just repurposing these paper milk containers. They're half gallon. I cut off maybe about the top 3 inches of the container, and I filled it. It was 2/3 full of dirt, but it's compacted from being watered and just settling in more. So it's probably around half full for the total gallon or the total half gallon capacity. So this is roughly a quart of dirt in here, I would say. As you can see, my plant is really tall and happy, and I am happy that it is happy. It's already putting off some side suckers. In the past, I have trimmed those off, but I've been reading a tomato book, and this person was recommending to actually just leave them. So I'm going to try it this year. I'm going to have to go in a couple times and probably thin out some branches just to get some airflow going through there, because when you don't have airflow and you have moisture pockets forming around the leaves, you can trigger some basically fungal or bacterial infections, which I would rather not have happen. So I'm gonna have these. I'm going to plant them in my garden over here. My garden is a little on the rough side right now. Life happens. I've been busy. Work has been busy. So normally, as I was saying, I would have had this planted earlier, and being that I would have been in the garden earlier, these weeds wouldn't have gotten so big. The yellow flowers in the back are actually a kind of Asian mustard. And I planted the Asian mustard last fall. It overwintered and it produced some lovely greens for me this spring. I'm actually a little disappointed that I'm going to have to dig them up, because this is exactly where I had planned to put my tomatoes. So I kind of can't change that because I have a gridded system and I literally plan out every square foot of my garden. So I am going to have to remove those, and I'm sad because the bees have discovered them, and so they've been using that as a food source. I'm going to see if I can maybe kind of temporarily move it somewhere else so it can finish its blooming season and continue to feed the bees until more of my plants start to bloom. But we're just going to see how this goes. I have some. I already marked out some spots. I put in some bamboo stakes. I'm going to have 2 rows of tomatoes. They're going to be 4 feet apart, and then each tomato plant is going to be 2 feet apart. If you have the space, 3 feet would be better because tomatoes do like to get pretty big. But I do have a smaller space, and I wanted to make sure that I get in all of the varieties that I wanted. So that is going to be a little closer, but 2 feet works. Trying to get them much closer than that is a little risky unless you are planting things that are specifically listed as dwarf or miniature and say that they don't need a whole bunch of space. I am going to try a couple varieties of those this year, and I'm going to just put them in pots and see how they do, so they won't actually be in my garden proper. But several of my varieties of tomatoes will get 8 to 10 feet tall, so I definitely need to give them lots of room. Right back here, this monstrous thing. This is my bean fence that we just put in this past Monday. It is cattle panel, 16-foot cattle panel. We cut in half and then kind of fitted together like a folded screen, and then have propped up with some bamboo stakes. And I'm going to have 3 varieties of beans, sweet potatoes at the base, a couple of cucumbers in there, and that is going to be around 5 feet away from my tomatoes because I wanted to make sure that they have the room that they need to spread out, and my tomatoes won't overshadow them when they start to grow because the light is coming from this direction. So if I have my tomatoes here, the shadow is going to be cast behind it. So if I have things that need a lot of sun planted at its base, it's going to kind of strangle the sunlight. So I just want to make sure that everyone's happy and everyone gets the amount of sunlight that they need to produce and be healthy plants. So let's get in this craziness and see if we can get some tomatoes in there. Yay! Okay, so if you are gardening for the first time and you're wanting to plant your tomatoes, most people will be getting tomatoes in some sort of container. Some people do sell plants in a compostable container, so all you do is literally plop the plant in the ground and you're good. But for the majority of us who are starting them at home or going out and buying plants, it will be in a more solid container that needs to be removed before we can put them in the ground. So there are some misconceptions on how you should remove a plant. You should never grab it by the stem and just yank it out of the container. The odds of snapping your stem at that point are pretty high, and also you're adding more stress to what is already going to be a stressful situation for this plant. It's also a good idea to maybe not water it for a day or 2 beforehand. The soil will be drier and therefore a little looser in the container and easier to remove. If it's sopping wet, it's going to want to stick to the inside of your container, so removing it without damaging the roots is more difficult to do. So in order to loosen up the pot, I'm just going to gently kind of move it around with my fingers, and you can see it's loosening, it's shifting from side to side, and that shifting is basically separating the sides of the wall from the inside wall of the dirt. So now that I have that loosened, I still don't want to grab the stem and yank it out of the pot. That, as I was saying, can add stress to the situation, and we don't want to stress the plant out. The least manipulation we can do to the roots to get it in the ground, the happier the plant will be, and it will establish more quickly. If it's trying to repair damage that it encountered, it's going to take longer for those roots to establish, and it's going to look definitely a lot sadder when you put it in. So at this point, now that it's loosened, I don't want to yank it. I'm just going to flip it upside down, and I cup it between some fingers so my hands will support the root bulb as it's coming out. I'm just going to wiggle it, gentle pull, and it slides right out. So now I have this ready to go. And I don't have my hole dug yet, so I can just put this to the side until I'm ready to place it in the ground. I use a tape measure to distance everything out because I like to be pretty precise, and this ensures that I am putting the correct amount of distance instead of eyeballing it. Sometimes things get closer and closer as you move along, and you might not have enough space for a plant that you thought you did originally. So I'm just going to give this 2 feet. And I use a garden fork for most of my planting needs. Just dig this into the ground. And I'm going to want to make this hole fairly deep. We haven't really had any rain in quite a while, so the ground is pretty hard. It's usually not quite this hard at this time of year, but our weather's definitely changing. So I'm going to want to put all of the soil that I'm removing from this hole in one location to the side, because then I know that all of that is what needs to go back in this location instead of kind of shifting it around all over the place. Okay. What I have here is a really large raised bed, and it's a little less than 3 years old. This is on top of rock hard red clay. If you're in the Appalachia area at all, pretty much this whole region is built on red clay. It's hard to get a lot of nice, good growing soil in a lot of areas, so red hard clay doesn't make the best garden growing medium. So when we built this raised bed, we completely filled it up with horse manure and sawdust. It was cleaning out from a barn, and we just literally filled it with tons of horse manure. So the soil that I've been able to build up in here is from that composting, and when I dig down, you can see I'm getting into that clay. So my goal has been to deepen the garden as I'm planting things to give them a better root system structure. Clay is a little difficult because since it's so hard, it's difficult for the roots to spread out, and it also is usually either dry or wet. It's hard for it to moderate in between because a lot of your moisture retention properties comes from the organic matter in the soil. So when your area is void of it, it's easier for it to dry out faster. And if it can't really aerate, it just kind of can trap moisture in there too. So it can get kind of soggy. Okay, so I have this hole dug pretty deep. You can see right there. I have this plant, and I've dug down into the clay body here. So I want to give it as much nutrients as I can. I just dug a pile of stuff out of my compost bin. It's a combination of compost from the house and weeds that I pulled up. It hasn't been sitting a whole long, but it definitely has moisture and nutrients in it, which will help our plants grow better. I'm going to kind of push that around to the sides and into the bottom and make almost like a little nest for my plant here. So I'm just going to gently grasp this and gently but firmly put it in the bottom. And I want to be a little careful about this. You do not want to create a pocket of air under the plant because um, it's going to be a dry spot and it's eventually going to sink in more. So you want to fill that in. I have it cupped around, and I'm also going to just put in a little bit of dirt right now, and that'll help secure the plants in around the edges, so that'll ensure that the roots will stay nice and moist. And you can see I still have quite a bit of space here. I want to grab some of the weeds that I had been removing for planting these, and then I'm going to put that around it. Okay, so I've just had these weeds, and I'm just going to make like a ring around the plant. You don't necessarily have to do this step. It's that I've just removed organic matter, so why not go ahead and compost it while I can. This is fresh, of course, so it's going to have a much higher moisture content, and my garden composters really like fresh organic matter, so this will help attract composters like earthworms and pill bugs and garden centipedes to this location to help chew up this organic matter, and they will be producing nutrients and other substance for the plant to grow better. So it's a win-win situation. It'll also help retain more moisture around the plant roots, and as it's decomposing in the earlier stages, it'll be a little bit of a heat boost. Not a whole bunch, but it can produce a little bit of heat, which tomatoes love heat. So, especially in this early spring when it's been quite chilly, the ground's still not super warm. Now I'm just breaking up some of the soil to put on top. I'm especially trying to break up these clumps of clay because if I can get it to loosen up, then it'll start to incorporate with my soil that I've been able to generate. So it'll kind of just start mixing in a whole bunch, and it'll create a better growing medium all the way around. It'll be looser because you can see it's really chunky and firm. It's hard to get the plant roots to go around it, and I kind of try to mix that in with some of the darker, richer soil, so it'll be balanced out better. Okay. And when I was doing this, you could see that I buried the tomato plant pretty deep. The plant was fairly tall, which is a bonus because by planting the plant deep, it ensures that its roots will be deeper in the soil. There's going to be more moisture further down, and the part of the stem that was buried, I probably buried about this much of the stem. All of that will start to generate roots. So the more roots that this plant will have, the more it is able to absorb nutrients from the area around it. If I planted it shallowly, it would have less roots, and it would also be closer to the surface, and the closer it is to the surface, the less moisture it's going to have. So it could dry out a lot faster. This way I know that even if I can't get to water it for a while and we're having dry spells, I know it won't be completely dry all the way down there. And then I'm also going to put a ring of mulch around this. My husband collects all of the lawn clippings for me, which is another collection of just organic matter. By mulching it, it'll help block lock in more of this moisture around it, again, which is good for our composters. So it makes a better environment for them, and also, and moisture retention is definitely what we want. It will also help block weeds from growing around the plant, which will reduce its competition for resources. And then as it breaks down, it will continue to add nutrients to the soil. I just got my container of lawn clippings, and I also picked up a container of coffee grounds. I actually went to the Starbucks at my workplace and got them to save all of I think these are the espresso grounds for me. So I'm going to use some of that around here. Coffee is good for your plants. They do like that little caffeine boost, but you just don't want to give them too much because too much could be a bit problematic. Your earthworms like coffee, your plants will like it, and the biggest reason that I'm kind of wanting to do it is that caffeine kills slugs, and I have a lot of slugs in my garden. Especially with this mild winter, we didn't have a lot of them die off like we normally do. So I want to do what I can to keep my slug population in check. So that's a good bit of mulch around it. You don't want to sprinkle it on, like don't want to put some on just like sprinkling it. It gives you a visual cover, but it doesn't actually really do anything as far as moisture retention or even blocking out weeds. In some ways it would make it just more difficult seeing the weeds that are coming up because they might blend in with the little shreds that you put down. So you want to put it down thick enough, like an inch or two is good, because that'll be enough to block out the light from entering, which helps things to germinate. I'm just going to take one or two of these and kind of crumble it up and sprinkle it around. I think I'll add one more because I have plenty of this. And one nice thing about this is it doesn't cost me anything, and I'm also helping reduce what's going into the landfill, so it can naturally break down in my garden and not produce any greenhouse gases, plus give me a huge benefit to what I'm growing. So it's a win-win all the way around. When you're putting the coffee on, you want to be careful not to sprinkle it on the plant itself, and if you do, just go ahead and either brush it off or water it afterwards, because the water can just wash it off, because the caffeine can be strong enough to actually burn your leaves, and you don't want to burn your leaves. So that's that. Dig your trench, bury the stem as much as you can, put some organic matter if you have it, some compost. I don't use actual fertilizer. Fertilizer is, I just don't really buy it. Especially, I don't buy anything chemically based. You do not want to fertilize it right away when you first put it in the ground, because it can be too strong and you can kind of shock the plants. In that stage, you'd probably want to wait a week or two before adding in extra fertilizer if that's something that you do. So, this one's done. After I finish the rest of them, I'm going to come back through and water it. And these are already big enough that I can look at building cages, but that is for another time. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, let me know. Would love it if you liked my page and subscribed. Thank you. Have a great day.